Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0, episode number 4. Steve and the Mobster joining me. How's it going, buddy?
Good. We're talking today, people, about bulking on Euro Pharmacy products. What bulking is, what bulking's about, diet, training, everything you need to know.
So let's first talk about bulking, fall bulking. So this is all about fall bulking. So Mobster, I'm going to bring Mobster in here. So why do you think that it's so popular to kind of bulk up in the fall, winter, and then cut up in the spring, summer? But let's focus on bulking in this one specifically. Why do people do that? Do you think that that's something that they just follow pros, or is this something that naturally occurs?
It's a combination of factors, Steve. If you talked about following pros, and I'm sure there is some of our listeners doing exactly that, they have to remember, of course, that the majority of competitions are in the summertime. The other aspect, which I've mentioned on the forums before, is nature. And it's quite simple. If in the wintertime, your body naturally, to protect you, to keep you alive, wants you to have a layer of fat. That's a question of insulation and obviously having stored energy to keep you going in the cold and winter months when you will actually use more calories just doing normal day-to-day activities. So what I've argued on the forums is you work with nature, meaning it's a lot easier to cut in the summertime and a lot easier to bulk in the wintertime. And you're working with your body and you're working with nature rather than against it. Now, guys, that doesn't mean to say you can't walk around lean in the wintertime. You've got central heating, you've got heated houses, you've got padded winter clothing you can wear, and so on and so forth. But it's that little bit harder. It's a little bit working against what your body wants to do. So, yeah, I would say it's a combination of those two things, Steve. And I think something else which probably applies when you talk about the first aspect vis-a-vis professional bodybuilders, something that's used to be true and something that a little bit true for it still now, which you and I have talked about in previous podcasts, and that's seeing athletes in shape in the winter when those photographs could be months old, or of course, as you and I have referred to multiple times, seeing people that are freaks of nature with great genetics on Instagram who kind of almost need to be lean because that's how they make a living. That's how they make their bucks. Yeah, so back to you, Steve.
I think too, especially in northern parts of America and then Britain and Europe and much of the world, obviously our friends that do listen to this podcast in the southern hemisphere, their seasons are the opposite. So for them,
Yes.
they're looking to more cut when we're looking in the northern hemisphere to bulk. So I think it is a combination too, Mobster. I think a lot of people want to kind of copy what pros do. They see, I hear this a lot on the forums because they'll give someone nutritional advice and they'll come back and say, oh, well, Steve, I just watched a video of Jay Cutler walking around the supermarket with a cart and he's throwing in, tons of frozen fish. He's throwing in tons of meat. He's throwing in tons of peanut butter. He's throwing in all this food. That's just what he eats in a week. And I tried to follow his diet and I just got fat. And I'm like, dude, he's a pro bodybuilder. It's like me trying to go copy what Tom Brady does and expecting me to be a Super Bowl winning quarterback, or me go and follow what LeBron James does and think that I'm going to be a pro basketball player. This doesn't work that way. So you have to do what's best for you.
Yes.
So it's very important. We're going to get into diet and training later in the podcast. And in between, we're going to talk about the best steroids for bulking from our friends at Euro Pharmacies because they have some sensational options. And I'm really excited to talk about it, especially talk about the different options they have to really cover anything, any cycle you want to run. So, and I think also when it comes to bulking in the off season, I think a lot has to do too with, a lot of people are wearing more sweaters, more coats. So they're like, well, I can just kind of bulk up a little bit and then I can cut down. So really, bulking, cutting, it is something that a lot of people do in bodybuilding. I have a different perspective, but then again, I live in a place where you're in sandals and shorts year round. So for me, I want to look good year round. I don't do the whole bulking, cutting to that extent. Maybe I do it a little bit. Like I might put on some size and then do like a 5-day fast or 10-day fast and kind of shrink back down and then kind of alternate that way. But I prefer just to look good year round. But a lot of people do like the whole, fall bulking thing, and it gives them an excuse to kind of be a little more loose on their diet and all that stuff. But, you know, we're going to get more into specific of that. So Mobster touched on that a little bit before we start getting into the steroids we like.
Right. So one of the things that I made a note of, and you and I talked about in the pre-show, some guys get a little bit confused about the differences, and it's not a big deal. It's just kind of a small deal. What is bulking? Essentially, bulking is adding muscular body weight, but there's a little bit of fat there, guys. This is not what we call lean gains. It's recomp. Lean gains is that I could be, say, 10% body fat, and I gain 5 pounds of muscle. So my body fat actually would go down a fraction, 9.5, 9.75, something like that. But I've added muscle. Bulking is not worrying too much if some of the gain. It shouldn't be a lot. You shouldn't get horrendously out of shape, but it's adding a little bit. And as Steve said, if you're covered up, the psychological impact of not being able to see your abs or to be able to present and show your abs to people kind of dissipates a little bit. So as we said, for me here in the Northern Hemisphere, it would be hoodie, sweatshirt, and if I was a bodybuilder rather than the strength athlete, not being worried about losing my cuts, not being able to see serratus, my abs, my lower obliques, and whatever. So that's a bit covered up, guys. As we know, you've got dirty bulks, clean bulks, which we can get into another podcast. Don't use this as an excuse to get horrendously out of shape. Don't gain 30 pounds and have 15 pounds of that be fat, because you're just making a lot of hard work. And in fact, arguably, Steve, with reference to pro bodybuilders that you've mentioned, the worse out of shape you get, the more work you're going to have to do. If you've got 16 weeks to get ready for a competition, those first 4 or 5 weeks is just getting rid of all the excess fat that you didn't need. But say, guys, it's not about being super ripped and gaining 5 pounds. It's about allowing a little bit of fat. Cushions and softens the joints, allows you to use more weight in the off season, as we call it, in the winter time, in those cold times, depending on where you live. So yeah, that's what bulking is. I think that's the same for you, Steve.
Well, you know, it just, yeah, a lot of people seem to do, but like I said, you know, year round, I live in a place where that doesn't happen. I think people more in New York City and up north, Chicago, some of the bodybuilders up there are more into, but you have to kind of look at this. Are you that type of person? Are you that type of person who is over bulking in the fall and winter, and then you kind of get to the spring and summer, and then year over year, you're gaining more and more body fat. You're 0.5% or 1% body fat more than you were the year before. Then you're really overdoing it. So it's really important to understand bulking does not mean get fat. Bulking does not mean good fat, you know, just getting fat. Bulking means putting on some mass, but you want the mass to mostly be good quality mass. So we'll kind of get into the steroids that we're going to use here. And I think an more important part of bulking, number one, is appetite increase. And one of the best steroids for appetite increase is Mobster's favorite steroid. And I'll let Mobster talk about it.
Obviously, there's a couple that I really like, Steve. Dianabol is el numero uno for me in terms of bulking. If I don't mind putting on 10 pounds very quickly, and nearly every single time I've ever used Dianabol, 30 to 50 milligrams a day. I might even go as high as 60 milligrams now, Steve, if I wanted to bulk up. I guarantee you that if I wanted to put on 10 pounds right now, in the next 3 weeks, Dianabol would be my number one. And we'll talk about others in a minute, but Sust and Deca would probably be my number 2 and number 3. I know we've got others to talk about. Those 3, for me, I know that they work, and I know that I will gain on them. And it's definitely going to be, if not 10 pounds, very, very close to 10 pounds. It also means I know 100%, like I do if I get products from Euro Pharmacies, that it's good to go, that is working. Now, guys, I won't keep 10 pounds. Right now, this morning, I was 317. That means I would blow up to 327. 327 is a hell of a weight. 317 is a hell of a weight. I just know that Dianabol would be that number one, Steve. And we know, because we said this on previous podcasts, it is the number one oral. And when you've got a great source like Euro Pharmacies, you know you get what's written on the label. So, yeah, that would be the one for me. I suspect it's probably going to be number one as an oral, Steve, for pretty much everybody, with one other one, which we're going to talk about briefly, as a very, very close 100%. You're gonna bulk up on that drug. But yeah, for me, Dianabol, very easy to take. You've got the feel good aspect of it that a lot of people get on it, and
cheap.
definitely
Very cheap too.
Cheap. Yeah. And yeah, my appetite will go. My appetite, funny enough, goes up slightly more on my Sustanon Deca cycles. I noticed it on those, whereas with Dianabol, I kind of don't notice it. Maybe it's just because I'm so used to it and I know it's going to work, and I don't worry about calories going in. Whereas on Sustanon Deca, I noticed the amount of weight that I gained on those two. And I've mentioned this in previous podcasts, guys. Sustanon Deca for me, 20 pounds from 280 to 300 pounds back in the day. But the 20 pounds was too much, Steve. Seriously, I love bulking. I like trying. It's great for my strength. But 10 pounds, I think, is manageable, which is probably why I prefer Dianabol. It's manageable. I can get used to it. It's not there for ages. I'm going to keep a few pounds when I come off. Whereas 20 pounds on the Sustanon Deca was almost too much. Great in the gym, great walking around, but it was horrendous walking up and down stairs. So yeah, guys, there's a thing again. Now, I'm a bit different because I'm a strength athlete, but for you guys, 6, 7, 8 pounds on Dianabol with the cheapness, as Steve said, very simple, very straightforward. No mucking around. You know exactly what's going to happen. Would be a great drug. And the leverage has always been good for my strength. So any benching, pressing, even squatting, anything that I'm pushing off of another body part, those extra few pounds, those extra inch, nearly most of you guys, 10 pounds is about an inch. For me, it's a little bit less. But that extra 3/4 of an inch on most people, for benching, for example, pushing off my biceps, pushing off my triceps, pushing off my pecs, that's another 5, 10, 15 kilos on the bar, Steve. So it's a great way to add strength and muscle for me, and very, very simple. And again, super cheap, especially if you use one of the Euro Pharmacy sales. What about you, Steve? And have you used Debo, and what would your preferred bulking drug be?
Yeah, Debol was actually the first official anabolic steroid I've ever used. I'd used maybe a pro hormone before or something like that, but Dianabol was definitely the first one I ever used. And right off the bat, I started gaining mass, and with Dianabol, it rapidly aromatizes into estrogen, so it's very important with Debol to know that. And if you overdose it or you don't stack the necessary aromatase inhibitor with it, you'll put on a lot of water weight, and it can be counterproductive in terms of your health because you'll start straining a lot of your organs, especially your heart. It can start affecting your sleep. But Dianabol is one of those, appetite sky high on it, mood sky high on it. And the reason for that is it's the combination of the estrogen rise and the androgenic increase. And it's just the right amount to cause both an appetite and mood enhancement. But if you're running Dianabol and you don't notice an appetite increase, then that just might mean your body just is not healthy inside. So keep that in mind if you run Dianabol. Not always, but usually with poor appetite with humans, with animals. I mean, if your dog or your cat stops eating, and that's a good signal that you probably need to take your dog or cat to the vet because something is wrong. So keep an eye on that for sure, but you should have a nice appetite and mood increase on Dianabol and not a nasty, nasty effect where you feel like you want to punch the wall out. And get into that, Mobster, and then we'll talk about dosing Dianabol correctly.
Very quickly, guys. So I've had, long before my experience with Euro Pharmacies, it has to be said, back in the day, I got given some free Dianabol. Thank you very much. As a result of what I was doing in the industry, I was talking to, etc. Do you want this? Yes, thank you very much. And I got sent a bottle with the little blue pills as they used to be, versus a source. So the first 2 weeks of my cycle was using this bottle. I think I was 10 days in, Steve, and nothing, absolutely nothing. And the bottle runs out. There was, it was only half full or whatever. And then literally from Friday to Monday, and this is why you should always use a good source, guys, I was using the pills that I brought from a better source. And in those 4 days, Steve, I put on 4 pounds, Friday through to Monday. And that was literally the combination of water and, as Steve said already, the appetite. It's just 100% the difference between using a moody source, not recommended, not referenced, non-approved, versus using an approved source. And that was, again, this is way before my time with Euro Pharmacies, but that's the difference between fake and real drugs. And that's how quick it kicks in, Steve. So my experience, as again, Dianabol for me is one of those ones. I know what I'm going to do. I know how I'm going to respond, but it's especially good if I'm not looking to stay lean. If I was a bodybuilder, I'm not looking to keep ripped. I'm not looking to get lean gains. I just want I want to throw on a few pounds. I want to use that to my advantage in the gym. 100%. Yeah. So there you go. Make sure that you're using, regardless of the drugs that we talk about today, make sure you use a solid, approved, and recommended and highly rated source like Euro Pharmacies for your product. That you think.
So as we said, I mean, Euro Pharmacies, I'm looking at it right now, Mobster. They got 2 Dianabols that I see for sale. They got a 25 milligram pill and they got a 10 milligram pill. And it's not expensive at all. It's dirt cheap. It's going to cost you less to run the D-bol on a cycle than it would cost you to wash your car. Like take it to a decent car wash.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So Dianabol is cheap and it's effective. So you could go, let's say you got the 25 milligram tabs, 50 per packet, right? So you could run literally 50 days of it and you just need 1 packet of it and you would have effective gains. That's how effective Dianabol is when it comes to bulking. And, you know, just we'll talk about diet and training at the end of the show, but do it right and run, you know, have your diet and training on point and you can really look differently just in that 50 days. That's really all you have to do. So keep in mind with Dianabol, it's also liver toxic. So liver support's highly recommended with it for that reason as well. But I mean, it's a great bulker for sure. I don't know anybody who has ever used real Dianabol and not had sensational results in fast. Like I felt my lifts within 3 days. Instead of doing 6 reps, I was doing 8 reps on the same weight.
Yeah.
So you could feel this stuff, you know, kicking in pretty rapidly. It's got a very short half-life. So you might want to run it twice a day because of the short half-life and get a little more balanced when it comes. So I want to do once a day. I do D-bol twice a day, and you could even do it 3 times a day, but twice a day should be fine. So Mobster, finish us off on D-bol, and then we'll kind of get into the next one.
Yeah, I was going to jump right in here, Steve. So my preference would probably be for the 10 milligrams, and that would be if I was running 50, 60 milligrams a day. And as Steve said, so, you know, if I was doing that, I'd probably, if let's use 60 milligrams a day as an example, that would be two 10 milligram pills 3 times a day, like Steve said. I want to jump into the next one here, Steve. And I've actually had at the PSL, Euro Pharmacies have just sent me, Euro Pharmacies himself has just sent me, I ordered some Anadrol. And Anadrol, by rumor and reputation, it'd be the first time I've used it. I'm saving it up for something perhaps in the winter time, a little bit in a few more months' time. That probably more than Dianabol is a watery drug, from what I hear. And those people that I've spoke to, and by rumor and reputation, if you guys go on the forums and any forum, in fact, never mind our forums, you'll hear stories of guys gaining 20 pounds on Anadrol. Now, I suspect, Steve, that you and I are at a point in our lives where that won't happen. However, had Dianabol not been our first choice and Anadrol our first choice, I could see you and I on our very first cycle, had we used Anadrol, gaining those 20 pounds. Now, guys, again, the difference between gaining 20 pounds and keeping 20 pounds is night and day. I suspect that we will end up keeping the same amount of gains that we would have had on Dianabol if we, I mean, 5, 6, 7 pounds, Steve, out of the 10 pounds versus trying to keep 10, 15, 20 pounds out of the Anadrol. It's not going to happen, guys. Steve will get into the specifics of what the drug's about. So I'm going to give this a try in a few months' time. If you check my logs on the forum, see how I get on with it. I know also, Steve, for some people, it's one of those ones, probably more than Dianabol, that it feels like, and again, it might just be simple to toxicity, Steve, or the sheer fact of gaining so much weight, can be a little bit more of an aggressive drug, a little bit more of a, I won't call it a negative mood enhancer, but it's not as uplifting or feel good, perhaps, as Dianabol. And again, that's listening to other people online, seeing what they've had to say when they've been on it. What's your experience and what's your thoughts on this particular drug?
Yeah, I love Anadrol, and Anadrol is one of those. Actually, one of my clients, he does CrossFit, and he got on Anadrol. He wanted to get a little stronger. He was really good with his endurance, but his strength was kind of lagging a little bit. So I had him try Anadrol, and I warned him. I was like, yeah, you know, your endurance is going to take a little hit on Anadrol. Remember, it's a bulker. But he's like, no, I don't care. I need to bring up my strength. So he got on Anadrol. Man, did he bulk? He got bulked up, and you could really tell, like in his shoulders and his pecs, just everything got wider. So Anadrol is one of those I really like. I have a lot of respect for Anadrol. And Anadrol is one of those that you can just run it for 4 weeks by itself, and you can just bulk up in those 4 weeks. So I have a lot of respect for. If you go on Euro Pharmacies and look at what they have, Anadrol is going to be a little more. It's not that expensive either. I see 50 milligram tabs and 50 packet, and it's not expensive. And you could literally just do 50 milligrams a day for 50 days. It's actually maybe even a little cheaper than Dianabol. Dianabol is slightly more expensive per packet. So Anadrol is a very, very cheap steroid as well. So you could go the Anadrol route. Now with Anadrol, it's a really interesting steroid, Mobster, and a really misunderstood oral, because a lot of people think, well, it's a bulker, so it must aromatize into estrogen, but it doesn't. It's actually a DHT derivative, the way it's structured, but it binds to estrogen receptors. So if you're really prone to gynecomastia or estrogen-related side effects, it's going to be very difficult to control these estrogenic side effects on Anadrol because of that binding. So you're not going to be able to take an AI, and the AI will not help you here, and AI will actually probably hurt you here. So it's really one of those situations with Anadrol that you need to be aware of. If you run it, it does come with those risks, and it's extremely androgenic. I would say it's more androgenic than Dianabol for sure. And you have the potential on Anadrol to get really, really strong. But the appetite and mood increase isn't as good, in my experience, as with Dianabol. And it has a lot to do with the way it's structurally positioned, where it doesn't increase estrogen. So you don't get that nice androgenic, estrogenic increase where it really helps your brain and helps your mood. You don't get that estrogen increase on the Anadrol, even though it's binding to estrogen receptors. You don't get it. So you're not going to feel, you may not feel that appetite increase either as you did on Dianabol. You may feel a little more like, bleh. You'll feel like by week 2, you'll feel blah. I don't feel like eating on Anadrol. Yeah. Dianabol, though, you want to eat like a horse the whole way through. But with Anadrol, you're going to feel blah. So a little more different approach to it. So if you're a person who struggles with appetite, you may want to go with the D-Bol over the Anadrol. That would be the one to look at for those of you who are looking to bulk. But Anadrol is a great steroid. I recommend you try it at least once and see for yourself how you like it. And Euro Pharmacies has a great Anadrol. I mean, I can't believe how cheap it is, Mobster. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not expensive at all.
Just one more thought on this, Stephen. The fact you've just touched on it, it occurs to me, guys, it's one of those, would I recommend it to a beginner? Would I recommend it to a novice? And that doesn't mean necessarily that someone is new to the gym, but new to using performance enhancing drugs. And the answer for that would be no, because we talked about this when we talk about Tren, we talk about it with other drugs, Halo testing, check drops, etc. And we say, listen, sometimes, guys, you want to add weight, you want to bulk up, but you don't know how you're going to feel on a drug. So what Steve talked about there, that sense of, and I think he perfectly encompasses it when he says that sense of bleh, that sense of being slightly kind of like, what the hell, that seems to apply to Anadrol. And if you're not ready for it, if you're not experienced, if you don't know how you respond, then especially with you younger guys, and when I say younger, I don't mean under 25 as always, but we know you younger guys, sometimes they're the ones that are going to go out and push the envelope and do things that they shouldn't do. But even the 25 and up, if you've never used a performance enhancing drug and your first choice of orals specifically is Anadrol over Dianabol, then that kind of lack of sense of well-being, and it's an obvious thing here, Steve, it doesn't make you want to carry on the cycle. It doesn't want you to, oh, well, listen, I feel so goddamn meh by comparison to how I might have felt on Dianabol, but how I thought I would have felt on a performance enhancing drug, and all like this one. then it doesn't make you want to run another couple of weeks. You go, I didn't think I was going to feel like this. I thought I was going to feel like Superman, and you don't. In reality, and this is why we will encourage you guys to do logs on the forum, your lifts have gone up. You've put on size. Like Steve says, in his buddy's case, the CrossFitter, the shoulders were fuller, the chest is fuller. So it's working. And this is the thing that you sometimes have to get across to when we talk about high dose cycles, when we talk about the harsher orals, when we talk about the more harsher / toxic injectables, there is a price to pay. And the price to pay with Anadrol is that sense that you don't get the sense of well-being that you do on Dianabol, and you need to have your head ready and focus on the fact that it's only for a few more weeks and push on through it. That takes a certain effort of will. And again, if going to work, doing a day job and training and trying to push the food in can all feel a little bit too much. And Anadrol, them, I said, a little bit harder in comparison, for argument's sake, to Dianabol. However, if you are ready for it, if you are prepped, if you have listened to the advice we've given you on this podcast, then you know it's the Anadrol, and you push on through because you know it's only a few more weeks of the cycle to go, that you're going to gain. You've put weight on the bar. It's all golden. It's just that when you're not in the gym, when you're not pushing those weights, there might be a sense of being slightly worn out, a slight sense of meh, and eating the extra food's a bit of a drag. But we're telling you, be aware, and if you are aware, that part of your conscious brain says, the reason I feel like this is because the Anadrol, it's only another couple of weeks to go. Boom, I've bulked, I've added weight, I've got stronger, I put a half inch on. And that's what you need to focus on. Back to you, Steve, for the next one.
So next one I've done very well on before is Deca Durabolin. Now, Deca Durabolin, of course, is a nandrolone. So there's other esters too that you can choose from. And that includes nandrolone, phenylpropionate. And unlike the first two that we talked about, it's a injectable. So you're going to have to inject this. And so this is, if you've never done injections before, or you want to try Debol and or Anadrol first, and then you want to kind of do Deca or nandrolone phenylpropionate as your next cycle, then Euro Pharmacies has you covered. Their nandrolone decanate, I'm looking at it right now. It's a great compound. They have both NPP, nandrolone phenylpropionate, which is 100 milligrams a milliliter, and then they got the nandrolone decanate, which is the Deca Durabolin, 250 milligrams per milliliter. So they have you covered either way, whichever one you want to run with. So here's the differences between the two before I get into the compound itself. So the differences between the two is the NPP, it's a shorter ester. You're going to probably need to pin it at least 2-3 times a week. The Deca, you can pin literally once a week or once every other week. But most people who run Deca, they like to pin it once or twice a week. Make things simple, kind of gets in your system that way. And you can run it that way. So anyway, the more important thing with Deca, now Deca is a testosterone derivative, and it's been structured in a way where it's going to aromatize into estrogen at a far less pace than testosterone, about 1/5 as much as testosterone. So you're going to get way less estrogenic effects. And then it's also structured where you get less androgenic effects. So the misconception behind Deca is, oh my God, it's got a lot of side effects. So that's just not true. You got to look at Deca in a way where you're using testosterone, but you're using basically a milder version of testosterone. And that's what Deca is in real life. So when you run Deca, you can experience a nice mood increase. You can experience a nice appetite increase. I really had a big appetite increase on Deca as well. So remember, same way, and we're going to get into testosterone next, but the same way you get an appetite increase from testosterone, you'll get an appetite increase with Deca, but you'll get maybe even more of an increase because it's not straining organs in your body as much. It's not as harmful to your body. It's not as stressful on your body or an inflammatory on your body. It's one of the least inflammatory steroids. If you run it at a moderate or less dose, it's one of the less stressful steroids on your body because just the way it's structured. So now the one thing that people complain about with Deca is the Deca Dick. We've all heard this. It's a lot of people are scared of it. A lot of that has to do with people just parroting Deca on forums and scaring people. And a lot of people have been scared away from Deca because of it. But look, if you run Deca correctly, a lot of people who have been running Deca for years, talk to any guys who are mobsters age or guys in their 60s or even guys in their 70s, and they'll tell you, oh, I love Deca. I used to run tons of Deca back into my 30s and 40s. Never had a problem with Deca, Dick. So I didn't experience it. Mobster didn't experience it. So I don't know. I think a lot of it is psychological. People just get caught up in it. But this is what you do. This is what you do to foolproof avoid having Deca, Dick. And it's not running a bunch of testosterone with it, as most people are incorrectly assuming. The way you avoid Deca, Dick, is by using a DHT derivative with Deca. So you have a choice. You can use Masteron, Winstrol, or the easiest one to use, which is Proviron, because Proviron isn't going to cost you, isn't going to be a pain in the ass to take. It's an oral, and it's not going to have additional side effects like Winstrol will. So Proviron is the simplest thing to do. You can literally run just 25 milligrams a day of Proviron with your Deca, and you will be covered in case of Deca, Dick. So look, Deca at the end of the day, it's a great steroid for bulking, guys. Like I said, it's testosterone without so much side effects, without the annoying side effects that you would experience with testosterone that so many guys complain about in terms of the bloating, the insomnia, the high blood pressure, the cholesterol issues, all that stuff. So, Mobster, you're a Deca fan as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
I love it, man. Absolutely love it. I've mentioned multiple times on different podcasts, on the forums, etc., guys, that one of my best gains and my best injectable cycles was Sustanon and Deca together. Steve's correct in terms of the dosing. I kept the dose, the two things together, Steve, was under 700. I think 600 and if it's 675 or 765 milligrams. So there or there. If you said 750, that would be right. And he was also correct in terms of the frequency. I believe, because it's been a while now, I think I was dosing twice a week, Steve, about every 4 or 5 days. Something I will say in regards to Deca again is, unlike the orals that we've mentioned, which have relatively short half-lives, Deca's half-life is kind of long. So when we're talking about bulking, when you stop the cycle, you will still have Deca in your system for quite a while. I'm looking at the Euro Pharmacy site right now, Steve, and you're looking at something like 21 to 28 days based on the reference to their half-life right there. Something in regards to the Deca, Dick, Steve, which people don't think about, and I mention this from time to time, is when we talk, we'll come up and get a question about a specific thing to do with the drugs. And as often as not, you see me do this on the forum, Steve, I will ask about other things. I will say, what's your body fat level? What was it like when you started the cycle? So, for example, if your body fat level was high and then you decided to bulk, having a higher body fat level is never good for your estrogen levels. It's never good. If you was already out of shape, and I mean in terms of your fitness, and then you take a bulking drug, it's going to have an even bigger effect on your fitness. It's just going to be that much harder to do things. And when it comes to the libido specifically, good old Deca, as Steve mentioned earlier on, think about this, guys. If you take a bulking drug, and it doesn't matter which one we're talking about here, and you go to war in the gym and you are now pushing a shitload more weight than you was before, your bench, my bench went up 20 kilos on my sust. I think it was two cycles I run, I've just remembered. And both those cycles, I knew that I would add 20 kilos, 44 pounds to my top 1 rep max between off cycle and on cycle. But what else was I doing in the gym? Now, I'm quite good, Steve. I would stay on a program and I would just aim to get stronger. But what about the rest of you guys? What if you suddenly feel like you can do a lot more sets and reps? Now you're doing a lot more work. So the possibility of overtraining comes in. It's because you feel like Superman. It's because your muscles are blown up. The problem with overtraining is that can have an effect on your libido. It's one of the signs. It's one of the symptoms that we look for, you know. Are you overtraining? Do you feel tired all the time and your muscles tired all the time? What's your appetite like? And what's your libido like? It's right up there. Steve Smith, I think, will agree with me. It's one of those things that people don't always look at. And then, of course, as Steve said quite correctly, and we see this, and I mentioned it with regards to the body fat, you want to sometimes manage your estrogen levels. So it's if for example, using too much of an aromatase inhibitor will affect your libido. And so you've got to get that balance right. It's why Steve talks about all the time getting blood tests, seeing where your testosterone levels are, seeing where your estrogen levels are and having that balance of testosterone, so into estrogen in your blood to keep you on the right side of feeling good, to feeling like you're in large and in charge, and you're in the gym and you're cleaning your plate and you want more food. One of the things I will say, and I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast, Steve, on that sus Deca cycle that I remember talking about, one specific one was I said, I think something like I would be eating food and thinking about the next meal while I was eating the meal in front of me. That's an appetite. When you're already thinking about the next bunch of food that you want to eat, the next meal, while you're sating your appetite, then that's when your appetite is ready to rock and roll. That's when you're really putting that food in. When, as we talked about earlier on, you're on any of the drugs that we're talking about today, and you hate the food in front of you, and you don't even want to think about the next meal, that's when your appetite's been smashed. So yes, Sus and Deca for me, Steve, Deca specifically, was I was thinking about the next plate of food to come, the next meal. I don't want to wait 3 more hours. I'm thinking about having it in the next, as soon as this one's finished. So yeah, that's the kind of appetite difference. And of course, these are great if you're bulking. You almost want to keep an eye on the amount of food that you're putting in, because it can actually kind of get away with you. And again, this is the difference between me, Steve, you, the listener. It will vary. My appetite is not that crazy now. I don't think it'll get away with me, and I'm aware of it. So it would be one of those things where I might meal prep, so I know how much food I'm putting in. I know how much protein in. That's why we encourage you guys with training logs to put down your macros so you can see what you're doing, and it's that much easier to tweak. We've got an awful lot of guys recently, Steve, that are 130 pounds and 6 foot plus, 140 pounds, 6 foot plus. And the number one thing is diet. So these drugs that we're talking about, they're great ones for the most part of encouraging your diet. Maybe not so much Anadrol, but again, keep the notes, guys. Those will help you when you're having good days and bad days. You will see what's going on. You can know to put in a sandwich, a protein shake, another small, add another 50, 60 grams to your protein, have another 50, 60, 100 grams to your carbs, and as a way of controlling it. For me, Deca, when combined with Sus, my appetite went through the roof. And as I say, I would put on 20 pounds, 280 pounds to 300 pounds on that specific cycle. Yeah, also a feel-good hormone, and as Steve said quite properly, zero issues. I don't think I had a girlfriend at the time of the cycle I'm thinking of, but in terms of, shall we say, taking matters in hand, that didn't change. The frequency was right where it was before, it's right where it was after. It didn't change. So yeah, no effect on me whatsoever, Steve. Yeah.
So with testosterone, a lot of different options you have. I'm looking at the Euro Pharmacies lineup. I mean, gosh, I mean, you can't make any complaints that they don't have enough options. They have Sustanon 500. They've got Test 400, Test 500. They have a Sustanon 250, which is the historically has been the main type of testosterone. They have a Test SIP. They have a Test E. They have a Test ISO. They have a Test propionate if you like shorter esters, and they have a testosterone undecanate, which is a super long ester if you want to inject testosterone like literally every 3 weeks. You can inject the test undecanate for if you want to do like a really long cycle. You could do that testosterone, and then they also have a testosterone phenylpropionate. So it's really amazing. They have every option. So the ester that you choose is going to determine how often you inject and how fast it peaks in your system and how fast it leaves your system. So if you want to do a long cycle, then you would go with a longer ester in most situations. If you want to do a short cycle, then go with a shorter ester. So when it comes to testosterone, look, at the end of the day, if you're using it in a cycle, you could dose it anywhere from 100 to 500 milligrams. If you use it by itself, I recommend 400 to 500 milligrams. That would be a moderate dosage. Now, some guys go higher. Some guys want to run it really, really high. If you run it really high, be aware that the side effects, the more you run it, the more the side effects will step up. It's like a stair climber. The more you run, the more side effects are going to come, and it may become counterproductive. I myself, the most I've ever run of testosterone was 750 milligrams, and I didn't like it. I had better results running 500 milligrams than 750 because of the side effects. So the side effects, it's basically diminishing returns, especially when it comes to bulking. So with testosterone, at the end of the day, Mobster talked a lot about testosterone and Sustanon already. Look, same thing. Same thing, this is why it's a good for bulking. It does aromatize into estrogen, so you're going to need to use an AI. But even with the AI, you're still going to bulk on it. It's going to increase your appetite in most situations. And like I said earlier, if you're not increasing your appetite on testosterone, something may be wrong. That could be an indication that your kidneys, your liver, your heart are too overtaxed. Your body's too overtaxed, too much inflammation in the body. So it may make sense to kind of let go of the gas pedal a little bit, and let your body kind of, catch up to the kind of the damage that you've been doing. So I'm going to start talk a little bit about that. And we still got to get to my favorite for bulking, which is going to maybe surprise a lot of people.
So one of the things I was just thinking about, Steve, in regards to dosing. Now, we've talked about this multiple times on the forums, guys, so well worth checking out. 500 milligrams seems to be the sweet spot. And if you think, you can go on that and find out for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Go on and to the forums and literally put in 500 milligrams of testosterone and see what comes up. I guarantee you there's probably dozens, if not hundreds of dozens of thread posts telling you exactly that. And so it's fun. And I think some guys do exactly like that for fun, to talk about the idea of taking 1,000, 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 milligrams of testosterone in combination with other drugs. But the reality is thus, guys, if taking drugs made you Mr. Olympia, then, and obviously what I mean by that is taking a high dose of performance enhancing drugs, all the guys that were taking 2.5, 3 grams a week would be Mr. Olympia, or they'd be winning competitions. In reality, they take vast amounts of drugs because the Imagine the pros are taking vast amounts of drugs, and they're trying to compensate for the difference between their genetic advantage and the advantage of the pro. The pro, unfortunately, has got the genetic advantages with regards to appetite, the ability to manage drugs, training, injuries, muscle insertions, and so on and so forth. And you cannot overcome that by taking more drugs than you did last time. So the sweet spot is 500 milligrams. It really is. And we know that what we mean by the sweet spot is that this works for the majority of you listening right now. I will also say, in terms of, for example, and there are options like that available with Euro Pharmacies, the higher the concentration of testosterone, the more likely you are to get the symptoms of post-injection pain. It's just how it is. And again, some of you guys will have zero issues, and other of you will find that you haven't taken the injection. It's not a issue with regards to the cleanliness of the drug. It's just an issue with regards to how you feel in the site afterwards, in terms of your body going, you know what, 250 milligrams a mil was much better than 400 milligrams a mil. It's as simple as that. And again, sometimes you need to experiment there. One more thing I will say, Steve, and I've mentioned this again in previous podcasts, I said that buddies of mine, especially, I know most of my buddies at that particular time were strength athletes, were huge fans of testosterone enanthate. And yet, when I tried it, I got zero. And I mean, I didn't feel like I was on a drug, very little difference of scale weight, very little difference to training. So that's, again, one of those things where sometimes it's trial and error. And we've talked about this previously, including today, where you will have your own personal preference of what worked for you versus the next one. The difference, like I said, between Dianabol feeling good and Anadrol not so much, that will come down to you. Sometimes you guys will just work on through, no problem, you don't even notice it. For me, enanthate, for example, felt nothing, didn't feel like I was gaining anything, didn't feel like it had an effect on my training. And yet my buddies, I'm talking about 4 or 5 that were on enanthate for various competitions all around the same time. And for them, it was the base. It was the thing, and what other parts of the cycle could be added to. And they loved it. So I just didn't respond to it, Steve. Yeah, let's get into your favorite that's going to surprise a few people, like you just said.
Yeah, so Trenbalone. A lot of people think Trenbalone's a cutter. Trenbalone's for guys who do physique, and physique competitors. Probably close to 100% of them do use Trenbalone. So, but that doesn't mean Trenbalone isn't a good bulker. Trenbalone is a tremendous bulker. It's used in cattle to bulk up the cattle before slaughter, because the rancher, they want to get more money before they sell the cow for meat. So they want it to get it. If they can add a few pounds to that cow and then sell it, that's extra money in their pocket. So Yeah, Trenbalone's an amazing bulker, and I've always gotten bulked up and gotten stronger on Tren. Always. One of the things that Tren does is that it is so potent that it actually increases insulin resistance in the body, which is not a good thing, but in temporarily it can be advantageous to bulking because you're going to get carb cravings on this stuff. You get carb cravings, and it forces you to eat more carbs when you're on it. So don't try a no carb diet or a low carb diet with Tren because it's not going to end well for you. But you need to basically spread out your carbs when using Tren. So it forces you to consume more food, forces you to consume more carbs, and then you're going to gain more weight in the process. So I think it's a great bulker. And, Tren is one of those that it's extremely toxic and you want to make sure that you're not abusing it. So if you use it correctly, you can get away with doing it and staying healthy, but you want to be aware of the side effects. So Euro Pharmacies has a couple excellent trends. They have Trenbalone acetate, which is 100 milligram a milliliter. They have Trenbalone enanthate, which is 200 milligram a milliliter. Not expensive. It's not an expensive steroid either, by the way. I'm looking at how much these vials are. Not expensive. You could run 200 milligrams of Tren a week, and you can basically spend not much more than, you're probably end up spending way less than you would your car payment. I'll put it that way. And then they also have a Tren, which is a blend of Trenbalone, which is 150 milligram per milliliter. And that's also not expensive at all. So no matter which one you choose, the acetate is going to be more for people who don't mind injecting every other day. The Tren enanthate is going to be for people who rather just inject once or twice a week. But the acetate advantage is it's going to be in your system quicker and out of your system quicker when you stop. And it's going to be more flexible because you could stop it. Let's say you're 4 weeks in, you're like, I can't handle these side effects anymore. You can just stop it. So with Trenbalone, I'd say the dosage with Trenbalone, 200 milligrams a week up to 400 milligrams a week max. And I'll tell you with Trenbalone, 350 versus 400 is a big difference. Yeah. Literally 50 milligrams a week up or down is a big difference. So just like I talked about with testosterone, you run too much Trenbalone, it could be counterproductive. So I've always done well. My sweet spot's always been 250 a week. Now, some guys, we got a couple guys on the forum, Mobster's buddies on the forum, who run a lot more. They can run 500, they can run 750, they can run 1,000. And that's them. They get away with it. They're just built differently than the rest of us. So, and they like to hit it hard, and really, really abuse the shit out of it and then come off. So for them, they'll run a lot more. But for you, first time using it, no need to do 250, 300. So Mobster, talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into diet and training.
Now, I've actually referred to these guys sometimes because they will sometimes tongue-in-cheek, and we see this on other forums. It's almost like a sort of a saying. I believe I've even seen one time, Steve, a tattoo, and it was up the Tren. So it's a fun thing to say. But the reality in the two individuals that I can think of specifically is both of them have great genetics, right in muscle. 100%. I might knock their advice a lot. But in terms of their genetics, they both have very good genetics right in muscle. 100%. So they also have, as Steve just referred to, great genetics for how they respond to Tren, and they love it. But a key point, every so often, I'll agree with them 1,000%. And one of the things that they both talk about, and I'm thinking of one individual who said this multiple times, and I've agreed every single time. He says, hit it hard, hit it for a short time, and come off. And he's not talking about tapering. He's not talking about cruising. He talks about coming off. And it's one of the few things that me and him will agree on 100%. So that's the problem here. I think the other element of Steve is there's a certain, with regards to Tren again, dose dependent on what you want to do. And of course, quite often when we're talking about cycles, we talk about one drug specifically, whereas in reality, we might not run Tren on its own. We might run it with something else. So sometimes it's a combination of drugs that can create an effect. Now, Tren is the one that's been specifically proved to have effects, even if mildly, on your outlook, your psyche. You're actually in older individuals, and I've referred to this before, Steve. A study was done, a bunch of older fellas. I think they're all 60 plus. They all trained, which was fantastic for 60 plus. But every single one of them was getting a low dose of tren for a medical ailment, a medical reason. It wasn't just because they were hitting the gym or whatever else. And the research was to look at the effects on their brain, not on their bodies, not on adding muscle and killing it in the gym, but on their brains. And they said that tren was the one that had dementia-like effects on the brain. And again, that was dose dependent. The higher the dose, the more of an effect it had. Now, what was also true, fortunately, I believe, Steve, although it might be a bit more of a problem if you are an older athlete, 60 plus again, for the most part, most of these effects are temporary. They are like that when you're on, and then afterwards, if you stay off long enough, those effects go away. But again, if you're an older athlete, the chances for dementia, Alzheimer's, effects on the brain, etc., are that much higher. So for me, and we know this with tren, there's sometimes people will talk about the side effects in terms of not being able to sleep at night, aka trensomnia, the sweats that you can have on tren. And again, for me, I think Steve is exactly on point here when he talks about 250 milligrams. I might, again, with regards to tren, look to combine it with something else, but I would probably be looking for a low amount for both those drugs. I would probably choose the longer ester again, simply because while I would do the pinning, I'm not a fan of doing it every single frigging day. Why the hell? I want to keep things nice and simple, Steve. 1 or 2 jabs a week, hit the diet. And again, like the people that we're talking about on the forums, hit it hard and come off. Yeah, so the higher dose stuff, guys, honestly, these two individuals, they can handle it. And that's just a nice way of saying most of you cannot. So talking about 800 or 1,000 milligrams of tren, if you guys have not had that experience and you can't handle it, you're going to hate it. And we're back to what I said about the Anadrol and that meh feeling. Why you want to be wanting to eat, you want to be wanting to go to the gym, you want to be wanting to add that bulk and putting on the muscle and getting stronger. What you don't want to do is have that sense of well-being going out the window, feeling like something's the matter, feeling a little bit off. As again, from low dose tren, 250 milligrams, like Steve said, maybe combined with something else, I can see that working perfectly. High dose, and for higher dose, I think would be 500 milligrams or more combined with another drug, Steve, something else from the testosterone group. I don't want to feel like that. I want to feel like I'm hungry. I want to feel like I'm going to the gym to hit it. I don't want to feel like I need a day off. I don't want to feel like I'm running some sort of low-level viral infection, which in reality isn't a level of viral infection. It's just simply the toxicity, the drugs in my body having an effect on me. I mean, another one, Steve, if I want to bulk, do I want to be what? I mean, because of my size now, I wake up in the middle of the night. Do I, and my shoulder issue, do I want a drug that's going to have me have to get out of bed and change the sheets? Do I want that kind of disturbing my sleep effects? No, no, and no. So I want a drug that helps me sleep at night. I want a drug that makes me hungry. I want a drug that makes me want to go to the gym and smash the granny out of the weights. I want a drug that's going to add weight to the bar and put muscle on my bones. What I don't want is to be sleeping and sweaty and feeling horrible. So I can see 250 milligrams being manageable and having a great effect versus 400, 500, 600 milligrams or more, making me feel irritable, making me not want to go to the gym, disturbing my sleep, giving me trensomnia, making me sweat like a motherfucker. I don't want none of those things. And again, when it comes to tren, guys, as always, you are looking for a reliable source like Euro Pharmacies, knowing what you've got, knowing that it's the right ester, quality product when you're putting it in. And as I said, definitely not a first-timer drug, in my opinion. Again, if you've never done an oral, you've never done an injectable, and your first choice is tren, it's kind of like, why do you go from there, Steve? So again, for me, even at Muscles, I've never used tren. I think it's done. If I was giving out advice to an individual, I would say wait, and I think you've said the same thing, Steve. Wait to your 4th, maybe your 5th cycle. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would, because what happens is tren, once you use it, you're like, man, I mean, I don't want to use anything else. So you're going to just you're going to want to just use it every cycle. So it's better just to work your way up to it. This way, when you use it, you can fall back on some of the other steroids and not be like, well, I'm going to fall back and go from using tren to primo. And it's just like primo doesn't even do anything, to me after using tren. So So let's kind of get into diet and training. Let's give 2 quick tips, Mobster. Why don't
Okay.
you give, either one, diet or training? I know I have a good diet tip. Why don't you discuss 1 or 2 diet and training tips, and then I'll give my opinion.
I'll give you one diet tip, guys, and then I'll talk about training. Right. So one of the things I said to Steve in the pre-show is the difference, and I think I mentioned it briefly earlier on, the difference between dirty bulk and clean bulk. Now, both will add some body fat. Don't pretend otherwise. But a dirty bulk is essentially, and it's not a good idea, really, is it, Steve? It's eating crap. It's eating donuts. It's having ice cream. It's eating jelly. It's having a lot more sandwiches of processed food than perhaps is good for you. And to me, it's one of those things, like I said earlier on, Steve, that you're going to have to work that much harder at getting rid of the body fat. So gain a few pounds. Again, if I added 10 pounds on a bulk, I would probably talk about 40–50% of that being water, which gives you 6 pounds. Maybe a couple of pounds should be fat, and the rest should be muscle. And again, after the cycle, good PCT, I want to retain 4 pounds. I want to retain 5 pounds. And again, maybe 1 pound of that is fat, but I want the 4 pounds to be muscle. I want that to be extra meat on my bones. Now, training, and this is where the combination of things is always coming in place. If just taking drugs and diets work, guys, we'd all be doing it. I mean, I love training, so it's a bit different. I would train because I can, not just because, it works at making me bigger and muscular and stronger. Now, training wise, bulk. You're not really looking to shape a muscle, guys. You're not really to look, say, for example, when you're super lean, you're not looking to the outer head of your tricep. Can you improve it? Can I bring up my rear delts? Can I make my hamstrings better? You're not really doing that, guys. And it's kind of a simplistic approach. Some of you might have stuff that you want to work on in the off season, but a simplistic approach from a bodybuilding, right, from a strength athlete perspective, again, would be thus. I would go to town on the compound, Steve. I would squat and press and bench and deadlift. I wouldn't be doing isolation exercises. Those would go out the window. They would wait to the end of the cycle. I might pick one muscle that I want to improve specifically. And one of the things that we do in strongman that you can do in bodybuilding, you can have the first 2 days of a 4-day training, 4 days a week training would be the first 2 days would be those compounds. It will be benching and pressing and deadlifting and squatting. And then the third day, which is what we do in strongman quite often, is we work on what we call accessory work. And accessory work includes not just the supporting muscles, for example, rotator cuff work around your shoulder joint, but also bringing up weak lifts. And this is something you could do even on a bulk. You could say you could work on improving your triceps specifically, but I wouldn't, again, look to increase, let's say, the outer head of my tricep. I wouldn't be looking maybe to specifically hit the quads at a particular angle so that I've got the outer sweep. I would literally just be doing the biggest exercises that I can use the most weight on, and these are the ones that are going to stimulate the biggest shape gains. So again, if I want to put on a bulk on cycle, I'm probably going to, on average height, average weight person, most cycles, D-Bol is a good example against Steve, 10-pound gain. A 10-pound gain is, on an average person, roughly 1 inch all over. So I want to put an inch on my quads, I want to put an inch on my chest, I want to put an inch on my arms. That's not going to come from doing pec decks. It's not going to come from hamstring curls. It's going to come from heavy ass lifts, the big ones. You can even, and this sometimes you'll see this, guys, off-season training, bulking. It's when the bodybuilder decides to do a powerlifting competition just to see where they are, just to see what the 1 rep max is on their bench, when they would never do it at any other time of year. You occasionally, Larry Wills is a good example of switching between bodybuilding and strongman and powerlifting and so on and so forth. You will notice that when he's not as lean is when he's doing his strength competitions, and when he's leaner, he's doing his bodybuilding. So that's working again with the bulking versus cutting. So stuff like that, Steve. Yeah, I mean, what about you for bulking? Are you going to be doing isolation exercises, or are you going to be hitting the big exercises like I've just talked about?
Yeah, there's always, I talk about on the forums all the time. Really 8 compound lifts, the 8 top compound lifts, and you pretty much talked about them. Just go to your, just know the difference. Like, I originally, the first time I started training at a actual gym, the first gym I had, it didn't even have a bench press. I mean, it was just like, it was one of those little civic center gyms, had a basketball court. So it wasn't really, gym that you could lift compounds. So when you go from that to a real weightlifting gym, you'll know the difference between, you know, what exercises you can do and what can't. I mean, a real gym has to have a squat rack. A real gym has to have a flat bench press, not just a Smith machine bench press. And we see that a lot because people don't want you to get injured, you know, even though you can. I bet you just as many people have gotten killed for the amount of Smith machines out there, but that's a debate for another day. So at the end of the day, look, that's what you got to do. I mean, so these big lifts, the cleans, the squats, the deadlifts, the bench press, you know, the dips and the chin ups and the, you know, those types of exercises, the rows, these are exercises that you could literally stick to if you really, really want to bulk the right way. So I got a lot of respect for that type of training, but you got to train the right way. You can't train negatively. So, all right. So it was a great show.
Diet, Steve. Before you go,
Wait,
what about the diet tip for you?
So quick, So just to give you a quick diet tip, and we're gonna get into this stuff and on future episodes. By the way, I don't want to kind of spit my load just on one episode, but one of the biggest diet tips, guys, is just stick to good, clean, natural eating, and the gains will come. Don't be in a rush. Don't be impatient. Quick gains are not good gains. So if you're not willing to be patient when it comes to your bulking, then you're going to end up regretting it. So just be smart about how you bulk, and you really have to make sure that you're sticking to a game plan and being patient. I think that's really, really important. Yes. All right. So it was a great show. We'll have much more tips on future episodes. You guys have to come back for sure. Thanks for listening, guys and gals. Evolutionary Hardcore 2.0, episode 4. Mobster takes a disclaimer.
Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions on these shows are ours and ours alone. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and First Amendment applies.